And now, everyone, let's put our hands together and give a warm welcome to our moderator, Michael Orlowski.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you to those who are here with us on campus, as well as to those who are joining us online. My name is Mike Orlowski, and I am the dubbing stage engineer for Full Sail University. And I'm hosting the session today titled From Field to Studio, Production Sound and Field Recording. Please put your hands together and help me welcome our panelists. First off, Fernando Delgado, owner of Stickman Sound and 2017 Hall of Fame inductee. Mark Kilborn, audio director at Raven Software and RA graduate. Frank Scheuring, mixer and sound editor and owner of 66 West Media, 2015 Hall of Fame inductee. And Ric Viers, sound designer, author, sound effects producer, owner of effects.com, and 2014 Hall of Fame inductee. Yeah. So I figured we would start with the elephant in the room of production sound, and that is production dialogue. Thoughts and feedback. Fernando, you work in live more so than scripted recording. Is that correct?
It's about 50-50.
About 50-50?
At this point, yeah. I've been doing a lot of live the last 6 months.
A lot of live?
But, it varies.
So working on a live production, what are your goals, top of mind when you're preparing to record a live event focusing on production sound, capturing
Well, in
the
terms of dialogue, mic selection is key. And that's why when you watch sporting events and stuff like that, you see the headsets on the commentators, because those microphones need to be just like what we're wearing right now. Good microphones with great off-axis rejection. And then, like if you're watching a NFL game or something like that, you see the Sennheiser headsets on them. Sennheiser sound great because we need to be able to pump that program and whatever the directors and producers are communicating to our talent. Okay. So that's a big thing. And then handheld mics work great. Sennheiser MD46s, they're amazing. You can have, I think we've done shows where it's, 105, 110 plus dB. Octagon side or ring side, and you go back and you watch the broadcast, you would never know it being a viewer at home.
How, throughout your experience when you first got into the live event world and recording, when have the bad mic choices come to bite you? How have you kind of honed in your, where you go for today that might have not worked when you first experienced it?
Well, I think what's really interesting is a lot of us, when we first come out of school or when we're younger, we think we know what we're doing. And I'll give you and it still happens even when you get a little bit older. This year, Las Vegas got our very first pro sports team, which is hockey, right? I never in a million years would have thought that Audio-Technica PZMs would be the choice microphone for sound effects on the ice, but they sound amazing. They sound amazing. And the first game that I worked, I'm watching the guys put up the effects mics around the ring, and I'm just thinking, this is gonna sound like crap, right? Why aren't you using this or that or whatever? And then it's funny because I was talking to a really good friend of mine on a later show, and he was the first person to use a PZM for ice hockey way back in the days from Connecticut. And before that, they used shotgun mics, and he had a theater background. And he was like, I bet these PZMs might work a little bit better. Yeah. And so he tried them. He was working with a gentleman named Bob Dixon, who ended up later on going on to be like master audio everything for the Olympics. He's just passed away about 2 years ago. But my friend Lloyd and Bob did hockey and boxing and all these things together, and they were the ones that started all these various miking techniques. So as a younger person, I was like, well, these guys don't know what the hell they're talking about. I'm going to do it my way. Well, you always end up going back to what the guys that know what they're talking about do. Right. So just paying attention, I guess, realizing that they were right and I was wrong.
So Mark, in the world of interactive and gaming, how do you acquire a production sound, or is it doing any kind of live recording with characters, or is it always in a controlled studio environment?
It's always in a controlled studio environment. However, we've been we've been experimenting lately with trying to make it sound more like production sound, which is, I don't know, it may seem a little unintuitive, but you know, when you record for a game, you're generally putting somebody in a booth with a large diaphragm condenser like a TLM-103 or a U87 or something, and that has a sound to it, but most films are recorded with production dialogue using a boom mic, like a shotgun or something out on a set, and then when they go into ADR it, they try to make it sound the same, so they'll use the same signal chain and the same kind of mic. So we're starting now to play with the idea of, hey, maybe we should make this sound more like a film by actually recording with the same microphones. So a lot of games do get done in a more, you know, in a studio environment with that kind of approach, but we're starting to experiment more with that. Mass Effect, I didn't work on it, but I read that they did some work with that as well, and it sounded really good. So yeah, it's a different approach, but we're trying to get more towards the imperfection of production sound, strangely enough. Haven't been able to get talent willing to go out into the world to record VO, which I think might be fun, but getting actors to go out and run around in a field and yell stuff is probably not going to happen for a game. It would be neat, though. So.
Now, Frank, I know you're very familiar with production sound and a variety of production sound, and we've had the pleasure of working on a number of documentaries together. In documentary filmmaking, the goal is to capture the story however you can. What are some of your favorite moments of acquiring the source or having the source delivering it to you and perfecting it and getting it ready for a final mix?
Wow, I don't know if I could think of like one specific thing. Although I did just remember something that doesn't really answer your question, but it's really funny, so I'm just going to tell you anyway. So we were shooting these interviews at this event called the National Italian American Foundation. Has this awards gala every year. And so we do all these videos for them. And anyway, we're there shooting interviews with these celebrities. And Martin Scorsese is there, and I'm setting up it was a Sheps shotgun mic just to do an interview. And I'm aiming it at him, and he looks and he goes, "Do I need to check that?" I'm like, "No, I'm good. I'm just going to ride and hide over here." But I don't know, capturing and perfecting it later, I mean, really, it's just about get it as clean as you can while you're out there. And with documentaries, like you said, you're capturing it right then. There's no, let's go do another take, you know? So, like, for example, Mike and I last year did The Cage Fighter for Jeff Unai, and he was running around shooting it and recording audio himself, and he was doing both, and he was running 6 lavs, you know, and monitoring by himself. And, you know, a lot of that, as Mike knows, a lot of that audio really sucked. Really sucked. But some of it was shockingly good.
Yeah.
And it's just you take what you're given and you have to make the best of it and rely on amazing tools like RX, you know, to help clean it up.
So Rick, you produce and have produced web series for Chop Shop. And essentially you're producing a reality show with your interns who are learning and training on proper recording techniques. So when you're producing the show, what is the mixture of wanting to feature them as talent, but then also wanting to make sure that they're recorded properly because you want to produce, you know, a good sounding web series?
So the question is, in terms of the interns?
Yeah, so you're using interns to shoot, but you're also recording them, but then you're also trying to get some kind of story.
It's an interesting process. Well, my background was actually location sound. I did production sound for like the first, technically the first 6 years, but the first 4 years before I got started into sound effects. So when we started doing the web show, I realized, I'm not going to be able, we didn't have the ability to have a boom operator following us around, nor was it conducive because of the stuff that we're doing. We're in junkyards, we're all over the place, and it just wouldn't work. Plus, if I have an extra mic, I'd rather be recording the sound effects. So the name of the game was we would hang a lav on me, and then it's just, let's see what happens. the whole time the shooter is listening to me though on the headphones. So that was the rule, is don't press record on the camera unless you're listening with your headphones, because if I do a stand-up, you're the only person that knows if it sounds good or not. So they would always kind of, pay attention, but a lot of this stuff just comes right off of the shotgun mic. So it came down, that's on the camera. So the name of the game was to tell a guy who normally only worries about the picture that your camera is also the microphone. So if Mike's talking and you're shooting this way, the audience doesn't hear Mike. And so that was really hard to get them to understand it. So I'm like, listen, you're not shooting until you wear headphones. Then they could really tell, okay, if I pan away, I can't hear him anymore. So that was the biggest hurdle for us, was teaching the camera guy that, listen, you're also the microphone that's picking up the audio of the people talking.
Fantastic.
And surprisingly, though, the sound effects that you hear in the show are not the sound effects that we're recording. Those are just the sound effects that are coming off the shotgun.
Shotgun mic, right.
And you know what? I'll be honest with you. I hate to admit it, but there are times when we'll spend all this time setting up all these really cool mics, and the camera that was 10 or 15 feet
What
away
do you have on
got a better sound. Yeah.
What do you have on the camera?
What's that?
What kind of microphone do you have?
It's just shotgun. It's NTG1, Rode
Yeah,
NTG1.
that NTG1, especially with stuff that have a really high impact, they handle it beautifully.
Yep.
I did a show many years ago called Top Shot. We did 5 seasons of these guys. It was a marksman competition show. And so the first season, they didn't give us a budget to do sound effects. And the biggest complaint that the viewers sent back to the network were that all of the sounds were canned, and that none of the guns sounded like what they really sound like. So the next season, they gave us a little bit of money to go out and play, and I had a day for every episode to go into these big canyons with the weapons team and record everything. And I had NTG1s because I thought, well, if it gets shot or if I blow a capsule or something like that, it's an inexpensive microphone. It's without question one of the best sounding microphones for doing those sound effects.
Yep.
The decay on it it handles the high sound pressure very well, and they're consistent from one mic to another.
Yep. A lot of guys use dynamic, which is still a great mic to use, when you're recording guns, but man, I almost always love the shotgun placement better than I do. My favorite position for it is 15 to 20 feet away from the shooter. I'll put one facing the shooter, the person pulling the trigger, and then I'll also put one at the exact same position facing the opposite direction. And sometimes you can mix the two, I'll use the front half of this one, the back half of that one, or do whatever. But I always seem to love that position. I put mics all over the place. I usually have 16 or 20 different mics but I'm that's the one I end up defaulting to. That's my favorite one. Yeah.
So Mark, as a sound designer, and specifically one who's done quite a bit of gun design,
Yep.
how do you incorporate tracks recorded from the field to assemble the guns that you've done in Call of Duty, for instance?
Well, it's a process of selection, obviously, and there's a lot of processing that goes into it too. But I like sessions that have tons of different mics and tons of different positions, because even the same mics in the same positions or in similar positions will give you vastly different results, right? Mm-hmm. And depending on the kind of gun you've got, certain mics sound better than others depending on the circumstance. And it's interesting, they point out the Rode NTG1, sometimes the mics that sound best are kind of a surprise. You might get, I get a lot of recordings where I've got a D112 on a mic, and that's a relatively cheap kick drum mic, but if you want to fill out the bottom end of a gunshot, it works really well. And then on the other end, the Neumann RSM 191 is one of my favorite mics for gunshots, because it just gets this amazing upper mid character out of a lot of different gunshots, and that's a stupidly expensive microphone, but it's kind of I like to think of microphones as equalizers, I guess, in a way. They capture sound, but they also apply an EQ curve to it when you record. And you want to be careful about judging them by their price or their brand name or whatever, because you never quite know what's going to be the best result in any given situation. And you certainly, as you record more, you'll start to find certain mics work well for certain things, but don't ever dismiss a mic and say, oh, well, that's a $100 mic. That can't possibly be any good, because I've recorded some pretty good stuff with an SM57, even in the sound effects world.
Right.
Don't misjudge them.
So when you're setting out to capture sound effects for production, walk me through what your sound package would be. So Fernando, do you use the same thing if you're going to capture effects for a show?
It really depends on what the client is looking for. Like, for example, that show, Top Shot, I had two 788s, and then I had two sets of identical microphones. And one was a near and one was a far. And that's kind of how I treated it. I had like a 250-foot snake, and we would run it that far for like the 50 cal weapons. And then we'd shorten the distances for like a 22 or something like that. But we always had, and I had a pretty interesting selection of microphones. I had like AKG 414s, a stereo pair of those. I discovered that the Sennheiser 8050 is an amazing microphone for sound effects. It's typically used for interior dialogue. It's about this big, it's a tiny little microphone. It's got a really, really tight pattern on it. But when I put it 6 inches from the barrel of a 50 cal weapon, it sounded better than any other microphone. And I thought, I bought them used because I thought for sure it's never gonna survive, right? I'm gonna blow this thing up. I never lost a microphone once because of a sound effect. Well, that's not true. I recorded a rocket, and I burnt a D112 up pretty good. I'll show you guys pictures later. It was pretty fantastic.
It happens. Those
Physically burned from the...
Yeah. Okay. So you can all look on YouTube, look at Blue Origin, look at the M4, M5, and M6 launches. There is a D112. There's a bunch of microphones on the launch pad, but there's a D112 about 10 feet from the main thrusters. And the whole idea was I wanted to hear the systems and all of that bottom end engage before the thrusters spit out the fire, right? Because as soon as the fire comes out, the rocket is in the air, and I'm no longer mixing those microphones. Those microphones are down on my console, and I'm going to microphones that are 500 yards away because it's so loud.
Did it work? Did it get what you wanted?
Yeah.
like a kid.
So you would do it again, sacrifice it again at RV.
I've done it twice already, and I've got another one coming up potentially next month, and I might sacrifice too.
Nice. Mark,
yeah,
have you ever lost
to finish up though, on the flip side, I did some ambiences for whatever UFC game came out most recently. And I took a bunch of wireless microphones and a handful of shotgun mics. And what I did is I spattered microphones around the arena to get the far away from the audience. But then I hid wireless transmitters and microphones on the chairs of random people around the arena. That way I could get the punch them in the face, kick them in the nuts, all that stuff. And
this was a wedding that he was recording.
And so what was really great about that is I didn't have cables running all over the place. I tucked myself in a small little corner, and I recorded those ambiences during that event. And when the client got everything back, they were really pleased because they had various perspectives in those ambient sounds, but it was all one cohesive, it wasn't a mix because they were all a bunch of individual tracks, but everything kind of blended really nice together.
Nice layers for them to play with.
Yeah, and I used anything from shotguns. I used a couple larger diaphragm microphones, but the thing that I think they were most impressed with was the fact that I hid lavs on the backs of seats so that I can get those individual sounds.
Would you do that same process if you knew you were going live to air? I'm just thinking for language.
No, but that's because we don't want the individual sounds on a live broadcast. We don't ever want to hear, like if we put a crowd mic up for a live event and I'm hearing somebody individually speaking, we place that microphone poorly.
Okay.
So usually when you're doing like a big arena event or something like that, like a spectacle event of some kind, you're taking your microphones and you're going as high up as you can possibly get them so that you can get the overall sound of the crowd. And then after that, it's all about the sound effects.
Now, when you're mixing that, you're in the venue, or are you?
If it's live, there's a broadcast truck.
Okay. So
and then usually on an event like that, I'm the guy that sets up the microphones and works with talent, or I mix effects. I don't actually mix the broadcast for anybody currently.
Gotcha. Mark, what's your setup for recording sound effects?
Kind of the opposite of his. We're not we're almost never recording big events. It's usually, we sometimes will go to events, like we sometimes record, there's this group of World War II reenactors that do big events once a year in the Rockford area. So we sometimes do things like that, but generally we're going out to capture specific sound effects for a specific purpose, whether it be ambiances, whether it be Foley. We like to do a lot of Foley recording outside, like footsteps and other movement sounds. So our setups are really small and very personal. So we've got, the department that I run, we've got a handful of sound devices units, 744, we got a couple of 702s and 722s. So it'll usually be each person with a sound devices unit over their shoulder carrying a mic, and the mics vary a bit depending on what we're trying to capture. We have an ambio that we sometimes use to capture, B format recorded ambiances that we can decode to surround. We've got MS rigs that are Shep's microphones that sound amazing. We've got an 8040 ORTF rig. We really like MS recording because you can get a mono always, and then if you want to turn it into stereo, you can, so you have the option, which is really nice. When we do bigger recordings where we're trying to record, like guns or anything that's going to require multi-mic setups, it's kind of a slacker sync sort of thing. We just shout the slate so that all the mics can hear it, and make a loud sound to sync it with, just a clap or something. We're nowhere near as coordinated as that because we're not doing big events. It's all about capturing individual sounds. But yeah, it's just a handful of small recorders. We've got some handheld recorders, a handful of mics for different types of sounds, and we just kind of go out and capture whatever we want.
Frank, what do you carry?
I'm even less organized than him. I have a very small collection. I use the Zoom F8 for the recorder, and I also have a DR40 and a little Sony, was it PCM 110?
M10.
M10,
The magic
which is
machine.
awesome.
Yeah, those things are great.
Luckily found that on eBay. And then a couple Rode NTG3s, 414, some U87s for inside stuff, PZM, Sennheiser PZM, and that, of course, 57s, 58s, whatever. But that's it.
Rick,
I just use my phone.
you use your phone.
That's wicked cool.
You're going down this way.
It's a true story.
You know what, though? Yeah.
But when I do it, I don't do vertical sound. I do the horizontal.
Oh, good. Thank you for that.
Not that old. No, it's funny because when I first got started, this is when they just invented the internet. This was shortly after the printing press. And so I was starting to look up stuff on sound effects, and there was only a handful of articles. Like at the beginning, there was like nothing. But I remember one. I was like, I need to find out, how to record sound effects. And so one guy's suggestion was use a video camera, because that way at least you have a visual reference of what you're recording. And I'm just like, this is going to need a little bit more digging on my part. But I use all sorts of stuff. A typical day is almost always a minimum of a 2-track recorder, a shotgun mic, and a stereo mic. Like if I'm just going gallivanting, I need to have at least a shotgun and a stereo, and I almost always use the shotgun. I'll use the stereo if it calls for it, but if I want to isolate something and I'm outside, the shotgun mic's going to allow me to isolate it because I'm a purist. I want to hear only the sound. If I'm going to hear the door of my car shutting, I don't want to hear distant traffic or a dog barking and all that kind of stuff, so I want to isolate that sound as much as possible. So for that reason, I bring the shotgun, but, hey, I'm in a great place and there's some wonderful birds. I don't really want to record that, birds as in an ambience of birds, then I would want to go to a stereo mic. But if I wanted to hear just the one seagull, then I would switch back to the shotgun mic. So it's kind of like photographers, they travel around with different lenses. That's kind of like what microphones do for me, is it allows me to get closer to the sound or further away, etc. But if I'm going to do a gun shoot, or if I'm going to the junkyard, or we're going to do something really crazy or fun, then it's like sometimes it's prep work of, okay, we'll get out the whiteboard and let's put guns here, we'll put the gun here, then we'll put all the microphones around the gun here, and this is what I like to have. And so let's say we bring 16 mics. I'll bring 30 mics or 25 mics or extra mics, and I always have a few channels of question marks. And every time I go out and record guns or cars or whatever, I always try one more position or one other mic I would normally not try. And sometimes they're ridiculous positions, like there's no way am I going to use it, but I'm like, but I want to prove to myself that I would never use it. I don't want to just assume. Right. And every now and then you're like, holy cow, that actually sounds really cool. I'm going to explore that way. But you don't know that if you're only following the rules. You'll never find the next cool thing. I mean, rock and roll music is great, right? Because you got the distorted guitars, but amplifiers were never made with distortion. That was discovered by accident because somebody's amp went bad and somebody went, oh, that's cool. And then it became an industry, right? So everything that we know is the next best thing came because one of two things. Somebody said, screw this, I want to try something completely different. Or somebody went, oh, that's cool. And then you find it by accident and you work with it. So I'm a huge fan of exploring. So I'd rather go, if I'm going to go on a hike, I want to go off in the woods without a map. I might need a compass, but I'd rather go without a map and just kind of blaze my own trail.
And one thing I'd like to add to your point about your phone, you know, the best microphone you've got is the one you have with you. So I have recorded sound effects with my phone before, and I've actually used them. And you mentioned the Tascam DR4, I think is the unit you have, and the M10. If you're capturing sounds, get a little handheld recorder. You'd be amazed the amount of things that get used in big films. I don't know if I want to name people. You know what? I don't think you would mind. Farmer has
something
it.
Well,
convenient.
and I was just thinking about
Yeah.
that story too. with-
Yeah, and he recorded a number of sounds that were used in the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films that he recorded with a little handheld Sony recorder.
I don't know, well, can we say that they're MP3s? Because if not, I just did.
I don't know. You can record
But some of the sounds, we can't say what, but there was the MP3s were the source sound. But you don't know that when you're in a theater.
Yeah.
Nor
in
do
the
you
theater,
care.
You're thoroughly entertained, right? So that means it doesn't matter what you use as long as it sounds good. It was Duke Ellington who said, if it sounds good, it is good.
Right.
Yep.
So when I was working in Los Angeles, when we would build recording sessions, we had a favorite kind of section in Palmdale, California. There's a strip of this whole intersection of roads for like a town that was never built. And ours was 240th Street and Avenue R8, just middle of nowhere. And that was our favorite section, and the different sound facilities had their own kind of secret spots that they would record sounds. Do you? I'll just leave this open to the group. Do you have a favorite place that, if you know you're going to record sounds for a film or movie, you're like, well, I'm going to at least start here because I know it's quiet, or your favorite junkyard maybe that you're going to...
I do have some places that I go to. Well, they're two different questions because like a junkyard, you're going to run into the same types of sounds.
Sure.
So junkyards, I found, once you've been in a junkyard once and you've had a really good day, you've pretty much used that junkyard up. Like I went back to the same junkyard more than once, and I'm like, this is not, I can go back to the original stuff. It's the same thing. So junkyard, I would probably play around with trying new ones. Environments, though, if you get something that's good and quiet, I mean, make it your own. A friend of mine, his name's Watson Wu, he's a really good guy. He does a lot of sound effects, but he's really known for exotic cars and guns. That's kind of like his wheelhouse. And he flies out to Vegas and various places for the guns, but he has a bunch of friends and a bunch of connections with guys that own like, $1 million cars and just these really exotic sports cars. And he lives in Tampa, and he's got a strip or an area that he records all his cars on, and he will not tell anybody where it's located because that's his. And I totally respect it, but I'm always like, come on, tell me when. He's like, nope, that's my place, and which you got to respect. But everybody kind of has their spot. When you found an environment that you know is good and quiet, that's kind of like your go-to. But at the same time, with a car, you want just absolute quietness. But some environments, like a gunshot. A lot of the gunshot, the character of the gunshot is the environment that you record it in.
Yep.
So when you record it in the desert, it sounds like it's in a desert. When you're in a field or in the forest, like the environment will shape the sound. So with guns, I almost always go to different places. Although I've done a couple where you do a repeat, but in general, I go to a different place.
I don't get a choice.
Yeah.
There's always cameras tied to the stuff that I'm doing, except for the every once in a while when I get to go do something like ambiances or something like that. But in that case, they're looking for something specific. Like when they called me for that job, they wanted amateur MMA ambiances. And I was like, well, there's a whole bunch of amateur boxing in Las Vegas. They're like, we want amateur MMA. Like, we don't want sound effects from a boxing match. We want sound effects from MMA. So I had to do a little research and figure out what events were happening in small enough venues that were going to give me the sounds that I was looking for. But for me, that's the best part. It's anywhere.
That would have been really helpful a year ago
Cage fighter. Jeez.
if we would have known.
Yeah, anywhere.
So I I get into a constant conversation that all of you have probably seen me talk about on Facebook about how I have friends in LA who are always like, you should move out here. And I'm like, no, man, I'm really happy working for a studio in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin. And this is one of the biggest reasons, because I live in Madison. We're the one Call of Duty studio that's not on the West Coast. But I can drive 5 miles west of the studio I work in, and I am in the middle of nowhere, farm country. It is totally silent. There might be some cows around depending on where I go, but it's really, really quiet. And we have seasons. So if we want to go record sounds outside and get kind of an outside feel for the sound, because I mean, when you record inside of an enclosed space, you're going to hear the space, right? We can go out into the middle of nowhere and record Foley, and it is dead silent. So, I mean, it's one of the benefits of living where we live in a town that's like 250,000 people. I can just go out to the middle of nowhere and record whatever the hell I want. And there are people that have property that'll let us fire rockets and do all sorts of crazy stuff, and nobody cares. So yeah, I guess my favorite spot is the place I live. There's like grassland and empty space as far as the eye can see out there, so I can go wherever the hell I want. I don't know that I'd even go to the same places more than once, because I just drive west of town and go find some empty field somewhere, pull over, and start working. It's pretty cool. So.
Now you mentioned seasons, and I've done a few recordings in the middle of winter, and especially with fresh snow.
Yep.
Everywhere, and if you haven't experienced, it's probably one of my favorite. Other than having to clear snow away from where you are, just so that the footsteps don't contaminate. But there's almost like an acoustic treatment.
Yep.
That snow brings. Is that? I know it's a bitter cold where you live, because we see it all the time on your Facebook posts.
Yeah.
But is that a key moment of like, do you plan for the winter of like, if I need to go and get these sounds?
We don't necessarily plan to record things during winter, but it's kind of a nice benefit. It has a sound, and it tends to feel a little less reflective and a little quieter. So it's nice to be able to record stuff outside. But honestly, winter is more useful because it gets rid of the insects and other things. So the ambient. I just dropped my phone. So like the ambient creatures tend to get quieter, and that's more important, I think, to us than having it be less reflective. And sometimes, honestly, we want that reflectiveness. It's doable to simulate stuff sounding outside in the mix. We do it all the time, but I'd rather just record sounds in a real environment if I can, and have them actually sound like they're outside rather than close miking something and faking it with delay and EQ. So it's beneficial from that perspective. One of the coolest sounds I've ever heard up there, and I've only heard it a couple of times, there's this thing called thunder snow, which I didn't know existed until I moved to Wisconsin.
All right,
Yeah.
what is thunder snow?
You can get, if it's cold enough and a thunderstorm hits, you'll actually hear thunder without rain. And it's like thunder in the middle of a snowstorm. It's incredible. And it's only happened, I think, 2 or 3 times since we moved up there. But it's one of the coolest sounds I've ever heard in my life.
Have you recorded it yet?
I've got some really crappy recordings of it. It hasn't happened in years. Now that I've got a much better rig, I'm waiting for it. I've got a little Sennheiser 8040 rig that sits in the Rycote on the mic stand in our front closet. My wife's over there nodding because it's been sitting there among all the coats. And one of these days when it happens, I'm going to walk outside and capture it. It seems to happen every few years, but it's a really neat thing. And that's like that's my unicorn sound.
That's your Moby Dick, right?
Yeah. So I'll get it eventually, and then I'll probably put it online and sell it and be like, here's a little recording of this. Go get it.
That's awesome.
But yeah.
Frank, do you have any favorite places?
Nah, I mean, I don't really go to any place, over and over and over. Mm-hmm. I think the most fun place I've recorded was at this UFC gym in Seattle, because it wasn't because of the location. It was because I had Jeff Unai jumping around in the ring and throwing himself on the floor and just acting like an idiot, and it was amazing. It was just fun to watch him get himself out of breath.
Yeah,
How'd it sound?
My favorite recording moment was on the Mummy Returns, and we wanted body hits, so we bought a turkey, thawed turkey, and I had my arm like wrapped in a squeegee, because for some reason I thought that was going to protect myself from the turkey, and I'm like hitting it with a dowel rod, and my friend Ann Chabelli, who's the lead sound designer, is recording me, and as I'm hitting it, like parts are flying off, and the last hit goes all the way through and hits my arm.
Ow.
and we had this kind of pact where like no matter what happens, you don't say anything over the sound until like the other person like kind of says like clear or something like that. So I do it and I'm like holding, and she says clear, and I like throw the turkey in the air and just and it hurt, but it's in the film. There's that like scene where one of the guys gets knocked off of like a horse or something like in one of the battle scenes, and it's in there.
You
Awesome.
hear like this female scream.
No, there was no. It was silent. Yeah, it just hurt.
Silent like
Yeah.
snow thunder.
Like snow thunder. So across the board, what was like one of your favorite moments just recording a sound, and did it get used, and if so, how? We'll start with you.
I don't know if I'd have a favorite sound. I've had some pretty interesting moments. One time there was a kind of like what you do. I always have like a package standing by, especially in the springtime is when it rains in Detroit very frequently. We have thunderstorms and stuff, so I always have a rig ready, and I'm just like, oh, thunderstorm, I'll put it out for a couple hours. I'll just hit record, and I'll just walk away, and then whatever it gets, it gets. Because I'm looking for not snow thunder, but the same concept. I'm looking for a thunder crack without rain. So I'm like, one of these days, never happened. But one of these days it might. We had a winter blizzard come once in the winter, and so I had my package ready, and we had this outrageous wind just whistling and blowing around. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to go out. And it was like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. But I'm like, you know, the sound is happening now. At 2 o'clock in the morning, nobody's out. So there's no traffic noise. And it's snow, so there's, you know, it acts as a dampener. So you got really good sound. So I went out for a couple hours and just, you know, got frostbite. And as I'm in the middle of the woods, it's pitch black outside. And I got my headphones on. So when you got your headphones on and you're in the middle of the woods and it's dark and you have fears of like, you know, werewolves and things like that. I'm in the middle of the woods. I'm like, oh God. Oh God! And everything's really loud, so it's like a chipmunk could be walking around behind you, but it sounds like because it's in your headphones. And all of a sudden, I hear this big creaking sound. And I'm like, what the heck? But all of a sudden, I realize there's a tree falling, and I'm like, and at that point, I don't know if it's the tree near me because when you got everything sounds close when you got the microphone. So I'm just like this, and you hear this tree, like, oh my God, I'm dying. And so that was pretty scary moment for me. But I actually got if a sound designer is in the woods when a tree falls, yes, he can record that sound. But what's funny is I didn't get the wind sound that I wanted. It's a true story, but I didn't get the wind sound I wanted. And it was really funny because I had my microphone on a stand because I was recording for hours and it's just ambient, so I just kind of sit there. So I walk all the way back to my car, and I put my mic stand down so I could get to the hatchback to open up the trunk. And apparently, I put the mic, and I always walk around with my headphones on, even if I'm not recording, just in case I hear something. So I set the mic, and it happened to be pointed directly at the crack between where the door is and the hatch is, so where it goes up and down. And apparently, the wind was blowing just enough at the right angle at that one little crack that it caused this outrageous, like wicked whistling sound. So then I spent an extra hour going around my car to all these various little cracks and things in the, in the car and in the, the grill and all that stuff. And I got these amazing whistling sounds. I wouldn't have recorded those if I would have taken my headphones off. Because when you take your headphones off, it sounded like this. You put them on, it's like what the heck? And you take them off and you don't hear it because your microphone, your ear has to be right there at that one spot. So I'm a huge fan of always having your headphones on and always having the recorder engaged. So some recorders, you have to have it in standby mode before you can hear what's going on. So I always have the mic going in my ears when I'm walking around, just in case something like that happened. And I made dozens of really cool Arctic wind drones out of that just because of the fact that I had my headphones on. I would have lost that sound. So I love your shirt, by the way.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, isn't it?
Who do you have today?
Yeah, who do you have today?
Can you tell?
Oh, that's awesome.
I have to get me one of those.
I like it.
I hear it's limited edition.
Limited edition? I hear they don't sell very well.
Yeah.
They're sold out now. You can't get one. Sorry.
That's funny.
Frank, what sound recording moment that?
Well, I mean, I think the most fun I had was recording for Cage Fighter with Jeff, but for sure, like I said. But I think my favorite sound that I've recorded, haven't been able to use it yet. I'm waiting for the right opportunity because I only want to use it once. I was hanging out at my friend's house, and his mother-in-law had recently passed away, and they had a lot of her stuff in the house. And there was this old clock, like hanging wall clock, sitting on the stairs. And we're just sitting there talking, and all of a sudden this thing starts making I'm like, what the hell is that noise? The batteries were dying on this clock, and it started to chime, and it just sounds like this evil, just
Oh, nice.
like, man, if you were in a dark room and that thing came on, you'd be like, what is happening, you know? And so I was like, I have to record that. And so he's like, all right. So we just sat there, and we were just turning the hands of the clock so it would chime again, and then I would just move around different places. And I threw that up on Dropbox and put it up on Facebook. I was like, hey, if anybody wants to use this, use it. But I'm waiting for that one cool like horror film to just throw that in there and have it just be really creepy.
I have a horse farting in surround. I didn't know if that was a really
Sure.
It wasn't intentional.
Right.
For some reason, I just see this you with beads with the horse. Like
I wasn't at the back end. I had the front.
That's
Thank
all about
God.
the mic placement, ladies and gentlemen.
It is.
I was there with an intern, and he was he was in the danger zone, and he got the rear end, and I got. But you can actually hear what a giant horse sounds like in surround. It's interesting what happens when you pitch that stuff really down.
Mark, save us.
All right, I'll save you. I've actually got two stories. I'll try to get to them quickly. One was years ago. So this is one of my secret. I guess this is a secret location for recording. I'm not going to share it with everybody, but it's not in Wisconsin either. I'm aware of a person in Texas who says he's trying to set up a museum, and he and his friends collect World War II weaponry and equipment and functional tanks and amphibious assault vehicles, and I think they might actually be preparing for a war. But I've been down there to record, and at one point I spent a week down there, and it was pretty amazing because he said, hey, I'm going to call some of my friends over and have them bring some of their guns, and they brought a working MG42. They brought look at the facial expression. That's about the facial expression we had when he was like, we'll bring that over. And one of the guys has got a grease gun. And do you want to record some mortars? Because we'll fire some mortars off. And I was like, okay, that's amazing. Then he said, hey, do you guys want to record some tanks? We have tanks that work. And I was just like, are you kidding me? Yes, we'd love to record tanks. Holy shit. I'm planning to go back down there hopefully in the next year or two and record some more stuff. But yeah, there's a guy in the middle of nowhere in Texas who's got like 3 warehouses full of war. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
So that was a really fun trip. And then the other one, I got to do a weird, fun side project last year. Guar put out a new album last year, and I'm friends with the guy who produced the album, a good friend of mine named Ronan, and he called me one day and said, hey, we need some sound effects for this. Do you want to do some work for a Guar record? And I was like,
That is
yeah,
awesome.
Of course. But one of the songs they had, and I'm struggling to remember the name of it, I think it was called Death Dealing Dickie or something like that, but they needed they needed the sound of pig children. Like it was just this kind of weird, specific quest. And my wife and I had twins like 2.5 years ago, and our daughter Kyrie has got the most incredible shriek you can imagine when she's pissed off. She's like cute and sweet and happy most of the time, but when she gets mad, like the whole world hears it. It's incredible. So I said, hey, I've got a great idea. Every night we put her to bed, she gets really mad. So I'm going to set my Sanken CO100K in there. And I'm going to run the cable out into the hallway, set up my sound, so 744. And I set that up one day, and for like a week following that, she would not make a peep. She would just go to bed instantly. I was so pissed off.
I believe
and then
that.
Finally, after about a week, she had a couple of bad nights in a row, and I recorded like 2 or 3 hours of this kid spread across several nights. We didn't let her shriek for that long. But at 192 kilohertz with a Sanken CO100K, which, for those who are unfamiliar, this is a microphone that records up to 100 kilohertz. So when you pitch it down, if you pitch it down like 4 octaves, you still have high frequency data. It doesn't sound like it's been low pass filtered like other mics. So I've got a couple of hours of her just completely losing her mind in 192 kilohertz recorded with the CO100K.
That's awesome.
It is an amazing monster source. I ended up blending it with some pig recordings, and I had this weird kind of Melodyne auto pitching thing to synchronize the pitch of the pigs and the and her voice, and it came out really creepy sounding. And of course it's guar, so there's so much loud guitars over it, it's hard to even hear it in the final mix. But it's in there, and at the very end you hear her just kind of losing her mind at the end of the song. It's kind of wild.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a fun sound, although I felt a little bad. She was really upset.
I think that the sound that I recorded that I'm most proud of was also probably the most vicious sound that I've ever recorded. So I don't really even tell very many people, but on one season of The Ultimate Fighter, it was during a fight, and one of the fighters did a roundhouse back kick, and he got his opponent right in the temple, and it sounded huge. But then this kid got knocked out, like completely knocked out. So everybody in the venue was dead quiet. Like, it was creepy. And I'm in the control room mixing this fight, and I start to hear like really rapidly, but it didn't sound like a person breathing. It sounded like noise. So then I'm thinking, oh crap, something is going wrong in the middle of the fight. That's not good, especially with something so dramatic. It was his breathing. My microphone just happened to be exactly where he fell. And because the gym was so quiet, you could hear him. He was like having like a mini seizure or something. And you could hear like everything. And I mean, the sound was amazing. And it's one of those things where I would love to, like, the professional side of me would love to feature this somewhere, because it really is, in my opinion, a perfect example of knowing what your client is looking for and then taking the resources that you have and applying them, because we nailed it. I mean, it really did sound amazing, but it's such a vicious punch and such a vicious scene that I very rarely share that with anybody. But I mean, it sounded like, oh man, it was amazing. It was amazing. Thankfully, the fighter was fine. You know, they took him to the hospital. He came back home that night.
Oh, good.
And he was fine. And if I'm not mistaken, he's still fighting today. The gentleman that knocked him out is definitely still fighting today. But that was with like the coolest thing I think I've ever like gone back and listened to and be like, damn, that was awesome. And then gunshots.
You should hear the horse fart, though. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm eager to. I'm eager to. You have to Dropbox that to me.
I'm telling you, man.
Join us.
I want to listen to it in the proper environment.
You have us all curious. You can
Yeah,
pull
well,
up your
telling you,
phone
man,
and play it.
It's worth it. I'm telling you, it's worth a listen.
We'll bring it to the stage and we'll watch it later. Capturing the sound is one thing. Bringing it back into the studio and prepping it and mastering it and tagging it, preferably in a database, is vital so you can find it and use it later. What are you using for that process? And walk us through from went to the field, captured the sound, come into the studio. What do you do first through it's now an asset ready to go in your library?
I think it's going to be fun to listen to our answers because we're all going to have different responses because of our different fields. So my main bag is the production of sound effects libraries. So I'm creating sound effects that anybody's going to use for potentially any reason. So given that mission, I have to create sound effects that can be used indoors or outdoors or for this reason or for that reason. So I try to be, generic is the wrong word, I try to be as pure with the original sound source as I can, so that the end user, sound designer, can make it into anything they want. That makes my job harder because now I have to find quieter locations or I have to use the right mic techniques so that I'm going to get just the sound that I'm recording. It also, at the same time, there are times when I'm like, I could play with this and make it this way or make it that way, and I want to explore and play and make it bigger or something cooler, but I'm like, but then the person can only use it for this one way. So there are times when, if it's something super cool, I'll give them both. I'll be like, look, here's the original source. This is kind of what I did to monkey around with it, and I think this is really cool. But for me, it's about taking out all the stuff that shouldn't be there and making sure that when you hit play, you only hear what I wanted you to hear from that sound.
Frank?
Yeah, I'm actually really need to work on my process of taking stuff I've recorded and making it organized. Really, all I do is clean it up a little bit, cut the beginning and ends off, and name it something that I think is going to work. But then I can never remember what I named it, and I'm not a metadata whiz or anything like these guys. So I just throw them in folders and let SoundMiner just pull it up whenever. It's like so basic and simple.
So for me, I guess my process is pull it in, cut out the stuff that I don't need, like slates or any really bad takes that I don't think I'll use. If it's got noise in it, I will sometimes noise reduce it, but I will save the unclean version of it as well, just because my hope is that in another 10 years, noise reduction plugins and algorithms will get better. So, when you denoise something in RX, if you push it a little too hard, you start to get this weird audible halo effect. You guys know what I'm talking about, where you kind of hear the noise like warbling in the background. So I'll clean it, and then I'll store an unclean version of it. I metadata things up and throw in my library, but because I'm not selling sound effects like Rick, a lot of my metadata tends to be very project-based. I want to know what project it was from, because when I'm looking at something, like, if I'm looking at a thing I'm working on this year, I might say, hey, that sound I recorded for Infinite Warfare, I want to use that. So the first thing I will type into my search engine is, what was that, IW7. Like, I'll search for project codes to find stuff, because I'm remembering things from other projects. As far as what I use for metadating, I actually don't use SoundMiner. I use Reaper for my DAW, and it's got a built-in sound effects browser. And then I use BWF MetaEdit to do all my metadata work, because I can pull the files in and then export it all to a spreadsheet and do all my metadata work in Excel, which I'm really, really fast in. So
BWF what?
BWF MetaEdit. I'm going to show it off I'm going to plug my next talk. I'm going to do a talk this afternoon about growing your sound effects library. I will demonstrate how this works. It's kind of a confusing tool, but once you learn the few steps you need to do metadata work with it, it's actually really fast, and it's free, which is awesome. But yeah, I do all my metadata work in Excel. I put it into the BWF header of the files and throw it all into my library, and that's it.
I do whatever I'm told. So one of the things that's really been interesting is digital recorders have become more of a staple in field recording. People used to do handwritten sound reports, and they were fairly detailed but kind of generic and stuff. What I found is that a lot of people don't ever see those sound reports, and you guys could probably answer that better than I could as far as like dialogue reports and stuff like that. Now that we have digital recorders, what I've started doing is I go to every post-production that I work with, because everybody has a different naming style. Everybody catalogs whatever it is that they're doing. Some production companies might only work on commercials, and they have a very specific way on how they catalog stuff in their post-production process, where other shows might be multimedia companies that are doing movies on this side of the company and episodics over here and live shows over there, and their post-production kind of have their toes dipped in all of those various genres, so they require a more detailed file name and the rest of the metadata that gets included. And the nice thing is, because of the digital recorders, I can get a lot of that information in while I'm recording. Where before you had to wait until you were done or set it up afterwards, and so it added more time to the day. Now I can be in the middle of a recorder with a little miniature keyboard, just plugging all the information in as I go. So, and I'm kind of anal about it. I give as much information as possible. I tend to give way more than anybody needs.
That's good, though. Metadata is, if you start collecting a bunch of sound effects and you purchase a bunch of sound effects libraries, you get to a point where I think my sound effects drive has got like 750,000 files on it, and some of it's stuff I've recorded, a lot of it's libraries. But when you get to a point where you have that many hundreds of thousands of files, if you can't find it, you might as well not have it.
Right.
So being really picky about your metadata and cataloging it in a way that you can find it is important. And if you're selling sound effects libraries, you've got to put it into a format that people can find. And when you're doing it for yourself, you've got to put it into a format you can find and use words that make sense to you.
Right.
Because if you can't find it, it doesn't exist.
And I worked with all sorts of different productions, so some people don't care. Some people are like, just put the names and we'll figure it out. And then I've worked with other production companies where, like if they're working in Premiere or in Media Composer, they can only do, I think it's like 16 tracks of audio. So we have to get creative with our naming files so that when the audio gets imported into those platforms, they create playlists to, kind of trick the system and bring more audio files in. So you have to kind of name it a little bit differently so that as soon as you start to import, Premiere or Media Compose or whatever they're using recognizes that naming in such a way that it creates those playlists automatically, and it saves the AEs tons and tons and tons of time just on the ingestion process. So I focus a lot of time on that. That's why I've been really eager to work with you, because when we met a couple years ago, we had this whole conversation about metadata. And that was one of the points where you were like, yeah, I wish more people would do that.
Yeah.
So we've been trying to get projects going, just nothing is solidified yet.
As a supervisor, the most metadata notes that we can get about production sound, the better. But that being said, I'm very similar to Frank. If I'm recording a sound effect, it's almost like I have friends coming over for a dinner party, and I just go on a scavenger hunt to find the best ingredients as I can, record them, bring them back, dress them up, and then it's my memory of, hey, remember that cool sound that we did? Like, hopefully it's on this drive somewhere. If not, that it was like, well, it was cool, and you can watch it in this film, but I guess it was never meant to be in another film again because I can't find it. But at this time, we have a few minutes remaining, and we'd like to open it up to the audience for questions to the panel. So if you raise your hand, they'll bring a microphone to you, and we shall start off.
So this isn't actually a question, it's more of a head start for you two. I'm originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I spent a lot of time in the UP, very familiar with Snow Thunder.
Yeah.
In the middle of winter, dead winter, go to the UP, doesn't matter, just find open field, open woods, stay there for a week if you're okay with the cold, and I promise you will not be disappointed. It is amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
I've got another friend, I don't know if you know him, named Chris Trevino, who lives up there, who does a lot of sound effects recording, and he told me the same thing. I haven't managed to get up there, but that's apparently the place to go to capture it much more frequently. And
Well, that's Boris, right?
what was that?
His name's Boris. I gave him the nickname. He interned for me for
I know he
3
did.
or 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you watch any of the video, I think he was in season 3. Actually, he's been in season 3, season 4, season 5, and season 6. He's a recurring intern that we.
Yeah,
have.
he's a good kid.
Actually, he's not an intern anymore. Now he comes in and helps me with the interns. But yeah, it's great. We do little explorations because when you go up there, it's the Upper Peninsula. So you got Michigan, then you got like the upper part. He's like literally in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
And so you go like a mile or two from his house, and you're like, that's it. You're in God's country, kind of, so to speak.
Yeah. Frank Breeze got kind of that set up.
Bless you. Mm-hmm. Were you recording that? Saying.
Missed opportunity.
Yep. Never
Could have
get
used your
another
phone.
chance.
Go ahead.
Hi. So for somebody who wants to get into freelance recording but doesn't have a lot of money to spend, what would you recommend for starting equipment?
Whatever
Rent.
you can afford.
Don't buy. Don't buy. Don't buy.
Well, what are you going to record? I mean, the answers, I think, are dependent upon, are you recording sound effects? Are you trying to do production sound effects? Whether you buy or not, I would get a little handheld, like the Zoom H4.
That would probably be the only thing that I would
Yeah,
buy, actually.
The
And-
Sony M10 used to be a really big deal until everybody found out about it, and then Sony discontinued it, and now it sells for stupid prices on eBay, so I wouldn't worry about that. But if you get a Zoom, like does the H4 have the
H4n.
XLR inputs?
H4n is a little
If you get the Zoom 4 with the XLR inputs, it sounds really good. And then if you ever do upgrade to a nicer mic, you can plug it in and use that as your recorder. But I would try not to buy and try not to spend a ton of money on stuff until you're making money with it. And then once you are making money with it, don't get into this. There's this weird treadmill you can get on where you keep buying mid-grade equipment and then you keep replacing it with better stuff. Try to live with the little thing until you figure out exactly what you want to buy and keep forever, and then go buy that.
That's why I say don't buy, because all of us will sit here and tell you 20 different microphones that we think are awesome, and you might not think any of them are good at all. And so, if you rent, sure, you might not be earning any income from that equipment, but you're earning a lot of knowledge. You're really starting to understand the differences between this microphone and this recorder and that recorder. And I'm talking about everything, even down to headphones. Your headphone preference might be completely different from what I use for monitoring. So one of the things that I've noticed a lot from graduates that are freshly coming out of school is they go spend a bunch of money on equipment, and then they're in a hurry to sell it because they're not using it.
Yeah.
You know, because they're not actually doing what they thought they were going to be doing when they graduated anyway. But I think more importantly, variety is awesome. Knowing what is good about different pieces of equipment is just going to make you stronger and more versatile anyway. So I'd say give yourself some time to get familiar with the various pieces, and then when you fall in love with certain pieces, and it becomes a staple, that's when you buy it, because you know you're going to have it forever.
Yep. And a good cheat for finding stuff to try, like don't rush out and buy stuff, but if you want to get a good list of mics to try, and I seriously endorse, like open up a little text document, make a list of mics to try out, rent them. But when you look through sound effects libraries that you purchase or get access to through work or whatever, make note of recordings that sound really good if they've got the microphone listed. That's a good way. I basically like totally cribbed off of Frank Bree's mic collection and tried all of them until I found the ones I liked, just because he meticulously documents every single mic he uses. Frank is awesome for that. But you can also find lots of good articles out there, interviews with various field recordists that talk about the different mics they use. And again, don't go buy them just because they use them, but that's a good way to build up a list of here's a bunch of things I want to try, and then try to rent them and see how they work for you and see if they're worth having. You're welcome.
Who has the microphone?
Hi.
Oh.
Yeah, right here. I actually have a question from a recording arts graduate. He's actually in Singapore right now. Yu Ting. He wanted to know how important it is to get the cleanest audio for sound design, production audio, and library storage.
That's what we get paid for. The best recording possible. That's all I care about when I go to work. It's just got to be a great recording. Because after that, you can do whatever you need to it. I mean, these guys will know more than I would about the post side, but if you don't have a good recording, you really don't have much to work with.
I think for the sound effects side of it, in terms of for libraries, you know, we want to be the absolute cleanest that we can make it. But I was probably going to toss it to you for video games. It's probably what would you say? Because you got to have a lot of variety as well. But how important is it for you for everything to be as pure?
It's important to get clean stuff if we can, but ultimately it's about the performance and getting the sound. Like I'd rather have a dirty recording of a really amazing sound than not have a recording of it at all.
Right. Okay.
And I'd rather have a good performance. And if I have to sacrifice fidelity a little bit to get a better performance, I'm willing to do it. It's a balance, and you kind of learn as you get more experience, and especially as you put sounds into a game or a film and you mix them, you start to learn what you can get away with. And that kind of helps inform the recording process, because you kind of reach a point where you're like, yeah, there's a little bit of background noise here, but the sound is really cool, and I'm going to be able to bury that in a mix or use RX to clean it up anyway.
Right.
But you know, still, yes, the goal is to get the cleanest thing possible, but I also wouldn't obsess over it to the point that you don't record stuff because you can't get a perfect, pristine recording. Right. It's better to record and get some sounds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. Performance
Yeah,
is better,
I
because
agree
think of it like music, right? So when the Beatles recorded, the stuff that they recorded on is so antiquated, and it's just the stuff you can get at Best Buy for a few $100 has much better fidelity. But yet, that doesn't mean you're going to sound like the Beatles. Like, those guys had talent, so there was something to the performance of what they were recording. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's kind of interesting with, as far as, you know, with talking about music and the Beatles, and when I first realized that I was never meant to do music, is the first thing that I would do to the Beatles recording is take all the hiss out of it. And people would ridicule me for it. I was just like, you know, but I've heard it in 24-bit and have all the broadcast wave files, and I'm like, I just want to put it in RX and just take the top end down just a little bit and take the hiss out, but you shouldn't. But yeah, I would agree. Record always, and with technology, there's lots of ways to clean it up. You know, just make sure you're pointing the microphone in the right way and get as close as you can, and you should be fine.
It's funny, you brought it up earlier about you're going to keep stuff and see if they can clean it up in the future. I did something like that back in the day. Back in the day, you could never clip. Like, if you clip, the recording was, you know, throw it out, it's not good. And I remember just thinking to myself, you know, one of these days, they're going to figure it out. And sure enough, I had, like, just hours of stuff that, you know, was blown out. We had police sirens that maybe clipped, or, you know, stuff like that. And I always said, you know, one of these days, and I kept them on a hard drive. And then as soon as they started coming up with declipping software, I went right for that hard drive, and I saved a whole bunch of stuff, all because of the fact that I'm like, you know, one of these days they'll come up with something that'll fix it, and sure enough, it did.
Although I want to make a point, kind of jumping off from that, though. That said, record everything you can 24-bit. You know, when you're doing stuff in a film, everything needs to be 48 kilohertz because that's what everybody works at. And in games, everything needs to be 48 kilohertz. But if you think you're ever going to pitch manipulate or screw with the sounds, record them at the highest sample rate you can, even if you end up downsampling it to put it into whatever your final project is. And as cool as it is that there's declipping software, try not to clip.
Yes.
Leave plenty of headroom. A lot of people get obsessed with, I've got to use every bit, and in 24-bit, it doesn't matter at all. Just, you know, peak at -10, you're fine. You can always throw it on a timeline and clip gain it up later.
Right, but a lot of people, because they're so worried about clipping, they record really low levels.
Really
I
low.
get that
Bring
from
it
a
up.
lot of people because people are reading their meters and they're set to the wrong setting and they don't understand what the difference between a VU and a peak meter are. And so you get the files into post and you look at them and you're like, whoa, I'm going to have to boost this up quite a bit.
A lot of recorders and mixers will have tone generator. Listen to the tone generator on your headphones at a nice, comfortable level, then turn that off, and then listen to your sound. Because if you're not, in a sense, calibrating your headphones, then you might think that, you know, just because you have the gain cranked up on your headphones and you're recording at a low level.
And your headphones are just jacked up real loud.
Yeah.
So don't peak at -40, but don't peak at -3 either. Pick a nice spot in the middle, and you can turn it up later, and it's safer.
You have plenty of room with clip gain. Next question. Yes.
Hey guys, I had a question. I just wanted your guys' opinion on the recent FCC auctioning off the 600 megahertz band, and just how you guys might, you know, how's it going to affect us?
I'm moving to Canada.
I don't use wireless, so I have no idea.
It's making my life suck. Yeah. It's not a good thing, but you know, the nice thing is we live in a time where technology moves quickly and the wireless manufacturers are going to come up with solutions eventually, I'm sure. But it's tough because wireless technology has become kind of necessary. Clients expect it. Where when I first started, you know, you turn on a field receiver, and if you heard a Mexican radio station, you turned it off, and you told your producer, we're not using any wireless today, because nothing was diversity. So it was like whatever it was picking up, that was it, right? Today, everything is diversity. The manufacturers have been able to make wireless technology sound really good and make it very flexible and easy to use. And the downside of that is people don't understand wireless. People don't understand frequencies or coordinating or any of those other things. And so that just by itself makes it really difficult. But then they're cutting out about half of our usable spectrum is not going to be legal, I think, after April. I got to update myself on that, but I think April or May, the 600 megahertz range completely goes away. That takes half of my usable space away. And my clients aren't going to tell me, oh, it's fine if we use less, right? We're still going to have the same amount of wireless microphones, IFBs, intercoms, all that stuff. Yeah, that's a big part of my world. It sucks. Thank you, FCC. Thank you, T-Mobile.
Next question.
Gentleman, right here, Frank, right in front of you. For those of you who are working in post-production with sound, talk to us in this auditorium about resynthesizing sounds and how you may import them into software instruments or samplers to either reinforce, augment the recording, or just manipulate it even more, just using the keyword resynthesizing. Do you guys do that, a lot of that?
I do a bit of that. Does anybody else?
So the question is doing what now?
Resynthesizing sounds.
So taking samples with the purpose of taking them and synthesizing them into something else?
Just enhancing the sound if
Yeah.
desired task in your post-production process.
Yeah, I mean, I don't use synths, and I don't use like the stuff that you use, Ross.
I was going to say, is that Ross?
But what I do is just, you're manipulating it to make it sound like you want. So what are you using? You're using, sub-harmonizers, like one of my favorite things, to use, and reverb and whatever, and just mangle it. But I think for me personally, because I spent so long doing nature documentaries, and having everything just have to sound as real as possible, that I didn't learn that process, which is why I'm so fascinated by watching Ross work. But you do some of that, though.
I do. So, we have this issue with Call of Duty where we keep jumping around in time periods. So when we work on, like last year's game, World War II, I don't get to do this stuff as much. When we work on futuristic titles, I do. But I do use it a bit. I use Alchemy. And honestly, it's when I get into more designy stuff like that, where I'm resynthesizing source materials, I tend to go into it with less of a target for what I'm trying to achieve, and I'm more just I honestly just kind of move knobs and buttons and see what comes out and listen until things start to sound good. And if something sounds like it might be approaching good, then I'll start tweaking settings to try to get there. But Alchemy is a favorite. One of the neat things about it is you can pull in a sample, and what it does is, I don't know if everybody here knows what resynthesis is, but essentially it analyzes a sound and it tries to reassemble that using raw sine waves, and it's based on the concept of additive synthesis, the basis of which is that every sound in the world can be recreated with a ridiculous number of sine waves. You can recreate everything. You recreate my voice. So a resynthesizer tries to achieve that. Alchemy's interesting because you can pull in a sound and have it try to resynthesize it, but you can say, hey, don't use sine waves, use square waves, use saw waves, do other really crazy things, and it produces, well, at least to me, they're very unpredictable results. I don't always know what I'm going to get out of it, but it's fun. I also use Isotope Iris a fair amount. That's probably my favorite sampler for doing designy kind of stuff, and that's neat because you've got the RX style frequency manipulation where you can pull up the spectrum view and start erasing stuff and manipulating stuff, but you have it in a sampler, so it's still mapped out across your keyboard, and you can put in a punch sound and then play octaves of it, but carve out certain pieces from the frequency spectrum if you want. It's a part of my process, again, more so when I'm working on more futuristic or trailery stuff. Not as useful when I'm doing really realistic sounding stuff. But yeah, it's something I enjoy, and I always wish I had more time to work with it.
The only synthesis I've ever done was there's a freeware tool years ago called Thonk. You would just put a sound file into it, and it would just generate and go, and it would create like 15-minute files of just weirdness, and you would just kind of sit and go to lunch and come back and play it and go, well, that's kind of cool. I might use that if not. And but yeah, I've never gotten into.
I love tools like that. I used to have this plugin. I don't know if it even exists anymore, called Crazy Ivan, and it was the same kind of thing. Like you just play sounds into it, and just chaos came out the other end.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You'd generate like 15 or 20 minutes of it, and you'd go back and be like, okay, these little bits are cool. I'm going to pull these little bits in and turn them into something. And again, for me, it's a lot about curation. It's about just generating interesting sounds and then listening to it and finding the things that are actually going to be useful in whatever context I'm working, and then pulling those in. So,
Ross, I hope one day you can show us what to actually do with these tools.
Yeah.
I would say you probably know more about this stuff than a lot of us do.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think post-production is fascinating with all this stuff, and that's just a huge part of this whole process for field recording. So whether you're using those type of tools or not, it's fascinating for all of us to hear.
I'm very similar with Frank's approach. Try to get the most organic sound as possible. I'll worldize quite a bit. I have a pair of Aventone speakers that will go on mic stands, and I'll bring them around in the environment, play a sound that I've recorded in a close perspective, and just kind of see if the room will give some kind of character. Hopefully the room that we're shooting active production in, so that the decay times match the same decay times as the production sound. But in post, I've always seemed like I'm so far under the gun to get it done for the client that I can't experiment. Would love to, but then when I'm not working on a film, then there's no call to action for me to like, hey, I'm just going to sit around and play with these sounds and see where they come from. And so it's a paradox. Next question, yes, sir.
Just ask.
I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm still here in Full Sail, not done my track yet, and I have great interest in doing sound design. What could I be doing right now to aid that path?
They're coming down. I think they want that question so that people on the web can hear.
In the mic for
There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Take two.
I have interest in sound design.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still here full sales. I have about 8 to 9 months left before I graduate. What could I be doing right now to help move that path along as a possible career?
Record something new every day. Play with the sound every day, every single day. The first time, I always give this illustration, but I name a guitar player, like anybody, Slash, Jimi Hendrix, whoever it is. The first time they picked up the guitar, I guarantee you they sucked. Like nobody picks up the guitar the first time. Oh my God, I'm amazing, right? You usually start with the one string, ding, 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 right? And then you work to 2 strings, you do the power chord, and then you work your way up. So it's an everyday process. You're gonna suck the first time, and then you're gonna suck day 2, but you're gonna suck a little less, right? And so the name of the game is to take all the suck away. The only way that you're gonna do that is if you do it every single day. You know, old hat, just got to make it old hat, make it second nature. Because once it becomes second nature, then you can start using creativity. But right now, you got to get the mechanics of how it works. So get used to where mic positions are, experiment. You know, when I first started, I had no mentor. I never read a book on how to make sound effects. I just went out in the field with a microphone and seen what I could do. And what I would do was my process, I would go out and record. And then I would come back. This is the day of DAT, and this is before you could just. I didn't have a way of doing, or no, you would do it through SPIDF, but you had to do it in real time.
Yeah.
So if I had a 2-hour DAT tape, I'd have to rewind it and then hit play, and then hit record on my computer for my DAW, and then I have to wait for 2 hours for the whole tape to dump. So I'd go watch a movie or do whatever, and then I would come back, and all of the sounds that I'd recorded that day were still fresh in my mind. I remember where I was standing, which mic I was using. There was some of that stuff was still fresh. And then I would sit there and I would listen to it and I would analyze it critically. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? I was looking for mistakes. It wasn't a bad thing. I wanted to find the mistakes so I know, okay, well, I just won't do that next time. Or, you know, how could I solve that problem? Maybe if I pulled the mic back a little bit, maybe if I pushed the mic closer. And I did that. Even to this day, if I'm out in the field and I'm recording something that I've never recorded before, first thing I'll do when I get back in the studio is I'll pitch shift it down really super slow to hear what that sounds like when it's, you know, slower. Or I'll pitch it up really fast, or I'll play with it just to see what kind of textures I can get. But it's always about experimenting.
And practice.
Yeah,
Practice,
2 quick
practice,
things.
practice.
One is find a sound designer that you admire, and then ask them permission for you to send them sounds. And I would defy you to find one that says, no, please don't send me any sound effects that you record or use. We all love sound effects. Someone called me tomorrow, be like, I'm just going to send you a sound effect every week. Yes. Second one, show of hands in the audience. How many of you, maybe a filmmaker, want to create movies, want to create content? All right, hold them really up high in the air. Okay, this is a sound designer in training who wants to put sound onto your movies. Find him after the presentation. And then whatever the film, short, commercial, webisode that's available, get on it, cut it, figure it out, be done with it, never go to that project ever again. Go to the next project, next project, next project. You'll get better. But start finding active productions and then find a sound designer you want to send some sounds to.
One other thing I'll chime in, all good advice. Listen to stuff that sounds really good. Go listen to Gary Rizzo's mixes. I totally listen to his mixes all the time. Listen to great sound design work in films and games, whatever your medium of interest is. And listen to the difference between that and yours and compare it and be very real with yourself about this sounds really great, this doesn't, and here are the things I think I need to improve. You know, one of the hardest things to do as a sound person, I feel, and maybe these guys will disagree with me, is opening your ears and being able to hear those differences. And I feel like if you can hear where you need to get and you can hear that you're not there, you can get there eventually. You just have to figure out how to get there. Right. It's being able to hear that difference that's hard. Not everybody can do that, and those are the people that I think are really lost. So if you can listen to a really good film and start picking out and even writing down the differences and making notes to yourself to how to get yourself closer to that, that'll do a lot to help you.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I'm actually here more as a film student. In those situations where I have a shotgun mic just mounted to a camera and it's just me, I don't have a boom operator, and you're looking for like dialogue from maybe like a documentary, do you tend to lean more to like a super cardioid mic or more of a cardioid? What do you kind of lean on?
I guess it depends on what you're shooting. Right? If you're shooting in an area, if you're shooting something that's very controlled, you might not need that extra tail in the back of that mic, you know? But if you're doing like documentary stuff, you might.
Yeah,
It just kind of, I guess it just kind of depends. Yeah, just get an NTG1.
Yeah, if you can, I was just gonna say, if you can only afford one mic, you go with the shotgun. But like what he's saying is, when you're outside, when you want to isolate the voice from the environment, that's when you want to go with a tighter pattern. But if you're, what he's saying is, if you're in a controlled environment and it's quiet, you can go with a cardioid or something that's a little bit wider and more forgiving. You don't have to be as tight on with the camera. Especially if you got like two people talking, you don't have to be doing this back and forth. You can get between the two and get a decent two-shot and be able to pick it up.
The nice thing is, not so much for sound people, but some of these camera mics that they're even making for DSLRs are pretty impressive. What you're able to capture with them, you know. So that's great for the like one-man band type situation.
Most cameras have 2 inputs, so I'm going to say both. Like, you know, if you just put both, stack them on top of each other, you'll have more rejection pattern on channel 1 and a little bit of.
I did that on Ultimate Fighter for many years. I used I'd put a MKH70 and I would zip tie it to the handle of the camera, and then I'd put a 416 in the shock mount of the camera.
Yeah.
And then I'd do a short shotgun on channel 1, long shotgun on channel 2. Well, actually, we were mixing 2 channels to the camera as well. So we did left, right, channel 1 and 2, and then 416 on 3, and MKH70 on 4. And the reason we did that was so that post could choose during the fights which microphone was more on axis for something, because I wanted to hear like the scrapes that people were making as their skin was, you know, that sound and stuff during the fights and stuff like that, and really kind of get the sound of inside the octagon for the viewer at home.
Well, I would
camera guys
absolutely
hate it.
love to keep going, and I know most of us would do as well. But please join me in thanking my panel today for presenting today. Thank you, Fernando, Mark, and Rick. Have a wonderful day here at Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
You all.